Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Wild and Live. It's been a little while. I was ill last week, so yeah, I was feeling under the weather. Nothing corona related, thank the Lord. Just feeling, yeah, just really ill, which isn't great. But hey, I'm back to, I'm back, and it's great to be back here and doing these Wild and Live shows for you guys. Really excited. Today we've got a really cool guest. But before we get on to that, remember, if this is your first time watching this show or first time on this channel, make sure that you click the subscribe button below, and also there's a little bell. Click that, and you get a notification every time we go live. So today's guest is someone who is an evolutionary and sensory biologist. This person scans butterfly brains for a living, which I think is really cool. Benito Wainwright, are you wild and live?
I most certainly am, Patrick. How are you?
I'm
Hello.
great. It's good to have you on. We've already had this chat already, but for everybody at home, we know that the sound is a little bit crackly
Yes.
on Benito's end, so he's going to do his best to. He's going to channel his inner thespian, and he's going to project and enunciate.
Yes.
So, Benito, what is it about butterflies that you love so much?
Now that's an interesting question, actually, because I must say I would class myself as a kind of all-round nature lover. I don't think there's anything really specifically about butterflies which really attracts me. It just happened to be the study organism which I kind of fell into during research.
Mm,
And since then, obviously, I've gained a particular fondness for them, I suppose. Um, I think they're really amazing in so many different aspects, really. I think their life cycle, for a start, is one of the things which first gets young naturalists and young biologists into
for
natural
sure.
history and nature. So I think they've got a really important role to play in that respect as well. And then, of course, there's the visual side of things as well. They're beautiful colors and patterns which capture the imagination and
Mm.
really get you thinking about why nature is the way it is, I suppose. Loads of
It's,
different reasons.
let's We're going to delve into some of those topics that you mentioned just now. Here's probably one. I don't know if this is one of the most common questions you ever get, but I think it's probably one of the most important from my perspective. What's the difference, Benito, between a butterfly and a moth?
Now that
Go.
sounds like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? But it's actually surprisingly difficult, and that's because butterflies and moths are just so incredibly diverse. There's, I think, 180,000 different types of species of butterfly and moth on the planet. So you can come up with loads of different rules for telling the difference, but because there's so much diversity, there's always going to be some species which disprove the rule. Um, Genetically speaking, they are a distinct group of animals. So if we were to look at their DNA, it would be quite easy.
Mm.
But obviously, not all of us carry a DNA sequencer around. So there are other.
I don't have a DNA
No,
sequencer at
well,
home.
no,
No, I don't. I mean, for me, sorry to interrupt you there. I was always told that the way you can tell moths and butterflies apart was by looking at their wings.
yeah,
And moths have wings that are flat against the surface which they're resting on, whereas butterflies fold their wings upwards.
it,
How much truth is there in that?
indeed. Yeah, that is a pretty good rule of thumb, actually. So
Boom! I knew it.
well done, Patrick. So yeah, butterflies do tend to rest like that with their wings closed, whereas moths, which want to camouflage themselves in the daytime, tend to rest against trees with their wings spread out like that to camouflage themselves.
Yeah,
But there
but there are
are
a couple
species of
exceptions.
butterflies which don't do that. So, sorry, what were you saying, Patrick?
No, I was saying exactly what you. I was agreeing with you that there are some exceptions, but that is a very good and quick fire way of trying to identify whether you're looking at a moth or butterfly. But they also do look very different. You, as we mentioned already, you study butterfly brains for a living. You scan their brains, which I will get onto that. I think it's so amazing. But when we think about their bodies,
Hmm.
how are their bodies adapted to their environment? and interacting with their environment, I should say.
Yeah, well, the kind of basic butterfly body plan follows a very similar body plan to most insects, actually. You can split a butterfly up into three distinct sections: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. But within each of those sections, you've got loads of different types of adaptation. So the head, first of all, obviously contains the eyes, these beautiful compound eyes.
Really big eyes.
Indeed,
Yeah.
which within each compound eye, there are thousands of different lenses that are capturing light and processing light in all sorts of cool and fascinating ways. They've also got a long tongue or proboscis, which is coiled up. Because it's so long, they have to coil it up, which then they extend to feed into different flowers, etc. On the thorax, you've got obviously the legs. All insects have 6 legs, but most noticeably, you've got the wings. So butterflies have 2 pairs of wings, and that's probably what makes a butterfly, really. Let's be honest.
That's the thing that I think makes them stand out from other insects. Really beautiful wings. Before we talk about the wings, because I'd love for us to go into that a little bit more. How long do butterflies live for?
Well, that's quite a difficult question to answer as well, because as I say, butterflies are so diverse. In fact, butterflies are almost 5 times more diverse than all of the vertebrates. So that's all of the fish, all of the mammals, all of the birds, all combined. So if I was to ask you how long a vertebrate lived for, that would be quite a big question, wouldn't it? Because we live for much longer than a fish, for example. So some butterflies.
So which butterflies do you tend to study?
I study a particular group of butterflies called the glasswing butterflies, and those butterflies tend to live for only a couple of weeks, actually. But you get some butterflies, such as the ones which go on these epic migrations, which we'll talk about later, I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
They can live for over a year. So I would say the average is about a month.
Continue on that train of thought of their life cycle.
Yeah.
Let's start with their eggs. You know, how many eggs do they lay? How do they lay them? Do these eggs have any inherent protection against predators or any cool patterns?
Yeah.
I understand that some eggs have these fractal patterns on them.
Yeah, so that's right at the beginning of the life cycle, and the female will lay her eggs using a part of her abdomen called the ovipositor, which she kind of squeezes them out onto the underside of leaves. So that's already a good idea, right? If you're on the underside of the leaf rather than the top of the leaf, you're less likely to be spotted. So that's already a pretty good adaptation. But on the surface of those eggs, you've got a waxy waterproof covering, which stops them from drying out. You've also got little holes, which helps the developing embryos breathe. Sometimes the female actually injects toxins into her eggs.
No way.
To stop them being predated, yeah. And that's particularly the case in the butterflies that I'm studying, actually, the glasswings. They do that. So right from the get-go, they're very much protected to avoid predators and to survive.
And with the toxins that are inside the eggs of the glasswings, that doesn't impact the developing embryos, does it?
No, of course not. So they've evolved to cope with these toxins over millions of years, which is really, really amazing. And in fact, the only reason why the female has got those toxins is because the male, before he mates with her, presents the female with what we call a nuptial gift, which is kind of just a little present. To prove,
like a wedding gift. Exactly,
yeah, to prove that he's a good male, which then the female then ingests and then uses that to be a good mother and puts some of those toxins into her eggs, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah.
Wow, it just goes to show how complex life is.
Exactly.
And something as simple as a butterfly actually has such a complex life cycle. Once those eggs hatch, we get the caterpillars.
Yeah.
And I suppose at that point, a caterpillar's life is all about eating and trying to stay alive.
Yeah.
How much do they eat, and how do they go about avoiding predators? Because caterpillars or insects in general form such a large part of the diet of so many other creatures, especially birds.
Yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right. They eat a lot. So, for example, a monarch butterfly caterpillar can eat about 200 times its initial birth weight in just 10 days. But to be honest with you, they don't have much else to do because all they've got to do is just eat.
It's kind of us. It's kind of like us right now at
Exactly.
home. Everyone's just stuck eating, getting fat.
Exactly. Because obviously they can't reproduce or anything like that, and they're born on their host plants. When the butterfly eggs hatch, the first thing the caterpillar sees is a banquet, essentially. So it just spends its time just eating that host plant and doesn't need to go anywhere. Perfect kind of life, right? The slightly harder thing to do, I suppose, is to avoid predators. That's where the element of risk comes in, I suppose. But yes, as you say, caterpillars have evolved a whole suite of adaptations to cope with that. So the most obvious one is camouflage, of course. Most caterpillars are the same colours of their background. A lot of caterpillars also group together to have a kind of a collective defense against predators.
Now, to me, that seems counterintuitive, because if a predator finds a whole group, then you're all completely done. It makes sense for me with schools and shoals of fish, because they're trying to look bigger and they shimmer and appear, and that's their way of warning off predators. But surely that doesn't make sense for those caterpillars.
Yeah, well, that gives me a perfect opportunity to give a shout out to one of the other PhD students in my lab, actually, Callum McClellan. He's actually doing his whole PhD on exactly that topic. He's finding out how these gregarious behaviors evolve. And what I think we see is that the caterpillars which do group together tend to be toxic. So by grouping together, you're actually making yourself look obvious, which for a predator can then learn that information and think, right, I'm not going near those group of caterpillars again. And by grouping together, you're reducing the cost of you being the one being eaten, of course, as well.
Clever strategy from those caterpillars there. Let's move on to what happens afterwards, because they eventually transform, they form a chrysalis, and then they come out as these fantastic butterflies. I find that whole metamorphosis process mind-boggling and probably one of the last mysteries of the natural world.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it probably is one of the biggest miracles in nature, actually. And the best thing about it, of course, is that you can find it right on your own doorstep. You know, even better, you can collect some caterpillars, bring them into your own house, and see the whole process unraveling before your very eyes. And it's just one of those processes which, even now, you know, now that I understand the process a little bit more than I did when I was 10 years old, I still think it's magic. So I think that's really just shows what an incredible process it is. But yeah, it's all changes in hormones, genes being turned on and off, which basically result in the body plan of the caterpillar being completely reshuffled into a completely new body, which just, as I say, just sounds like magic. But
and then they eventually come out as these butterflies. They've been munching these leaves for the best part of the first part of their lives, and now they transformed into these butterflies. And I know that they have a bit of a sweet tooth. Well, actually, I should say that they have a bit of a sweet tongue, because they don't have teeth. So what types of food do they eat, and how do they find it? Apparently they can detect their food using their feet, which sounds super bizarre.
Yes, butterflies definitely have an incredible range of cool sensors. But yes, so they feed using their long proboscis, which their preferred food generally is nectar from flowers, and that's where this kind of symbiosis comes in between butterflies and flowers. You had Emily Cooper on the other week talking about bumblebees and how important they are as pollinators. Butterflies are important pollinators too. But interestingly, they don't compete with bees for flowers, because the flowers which a butterfly likes is normally different to the flowers that a bee likes, and that's because of the shape of the flower. Butterflies have a really long proboscis, which means they can stick that in to flowers which are really tubular, which are bees' proboscis wouldn't be able to get into.
Right, I see. So bees tend to go for shorter or shallower flowers, whereas the butterflies can really reach in. That you can see that proboscis coiling and uncoiling. It's like this huge drinking straw.
Exactly. I mean, for a bee, it would be like trying to get the last few Pringles in a Pringles packet. If you see what I mean. I mean,
You know, that
you can
is
see what I've been
probably
doing
one
during
of
this
the
lockdown.
best. That's probably one of the best descriptions I've ever heard. Let's move on from the way that they feed to, as we were talking about, one of the more spectacular elements of their bodies, which is their wings.
Mm-hmm.
Their wings tend to be brightly coloured with lots of different patterns. Why do they have such a great variety of colours and patterns? Do they use this for anything other than flying?
Yes, they do. So yeah, as you say, butterflies do tend to be a lot more colourful than moths generally, and the way they use their patterns differs. I mean, a lot of the time it's for signalling between members of their own species. So a brighter colour.
Do they using their wings as a way of communicating with other butterflies in the mating process?
Exactly. Yeah. So an individual with brighter coloured wings is more likely to reproduce, for example. But one other way they can use their colours and patterns is for defence against predators, of course. So this has led to different types of what we call warning coloration. So colours which advertise the fact that animal is toxic and you shouldn't go near them, which is something which we see in the caterpillars as well, of course.
So some of them have these really impressive eye spots.
Mm.
Those are really cool, and they really do stand out. Does that help the butterfly in any way, having these eye spots?
Yes, it definitely does. In fact, that's kind of an area of debate, actually. It's not entirely clear what exactly they're using those eye spots for. There's all sorts of theories. One is that it's just a shock response. If you open your wings like that, you'll startle a predator and get it to move away. Some other people think they do actually mimic eyes, which I think is a pretty obvious suggestion. I think it must be something to do with eye mimicry.
Which is why we call them eye spots.
Exactly, yeah. And some other people think they're there to draw attention to other areas, less vulnerable areas of the body. So a bird is more likely to peck somewhere which isn't the center of the body. So maybe the butterfly could get away that way.
Because it can still fly with a damaged wing, but it can't fly or exist without its body.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah. Exactly.
And here, these butterflies. Actually, before I get onto that, let's stay on the topic of their wings. Two questions in one here, really, because there's some really interesting elements to how their wings are constructed.
Mm-hmm.
All these colours and patterns. I know one butterfly, the common morpho, also known as the emperor butterfly, has these shimmering blue wings, but the colour from those wings aren't actually comes from something called structural colour.
Yep.
So can you tell us what's that all about? And also, why don't butterfly wings go soggy when it starts to rain?
Right, two very deep questions there, Patrick. So yeah, blue morpho butterflies aren't blue, would you believe? It's all to do with the kind of nanostructure on their scales. So if you were to zoom in at about 1,000 times of the butterfly wing, you'd see all these tiny little scales. And what those scales do is that they interfere with the light and split it into its individual wavelengths. It
sounds like they're almost acting like a prism.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, if you've got a CD, if you look at the underside of the CD and you move it, then you get a property which we call iridescence, and that's definitely a property which lots of butterflies have. And the way the butterfly wing is structured is kind of similar to how a CD is structured in the way it diffracts and refracts the light. So yeah,
that's a really good example. I like that.
Yeah.
And what about these wings not getting soggy? Because they are super thin, super delicate, and for such a small creature, raindrops can be potentially quite hazardous,
Yeah,
even fatal.
especially if you're something like a blue morpho butterfly, actually, which has really large wings, very, very fragile. So yeah, that's all also comes down to the nanostructure. What a butterfly wings has are these little ridges, these tiny microscopic ridges, like sticking out from the wing. So if that's the wing, these are the ridges. And if a water droplet lands here, it means it doesn't actually land on the wing itself here, which means it just bounces off, which is very useful because most butterflies do live in rainforests where it rains a lot. So yeah, incredible adaptation. And in fact, those kind of observations that we see from nature, I've heard, are actually being used to help produce waterproof mobile phones and things like that, which I think is really, really cool.
I've heard the same thing. I think they've been looking into it for a couple of years
Yeah.
now. Actually, I saw there's a show called, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's got Richard Hammond in it, and I remember they took a phone, they put it into this kind of chamber, this oven, and they sprayed some sort of substance on it that mimicked what happens on the wings of butterflies. And he was able to drop this phone into the toilet, and the water got right into the phone, but it was coated in this substance, which stopped it from short circuiting. Really cool.
It's amazing, isn't it? And I mean, it stands to reason, really, because butterflies have been evolving for millions of years. So nature ultimately has the top solutions for a lot of these things. So I think when it comes to developing new technologies, I think that's something which we'll be looking at more and more, looking into nature. What has nature done? And gain inspiration from that. I think it's an interesting idea to ponder about.
I was trying to think of an example of, you talking about these ridges that lie on the top of the butterfly's wings.
Yeah.
And what came to mind was like putting toothpaste on a toothbrush. These ridges kind of protect the base layer of the actual wing. From getting wet. These types of adaptations are really important when it comes to moving around their environment, and what I'm getting at is the fact that they migrate huge distances. You alluded to that earlier, which I think for many of us, when you think about migrations, for me, what comes to mind are wildebeest, the great migrations in Eastern Africa. Birds, of course, have flyways all across the world and migrate huge distances. But butterflies would be the first animals to come to mind, but they do undertake these great journeys.
Yeah, and all the more impressive, I would say, for an animal with the brain the size of a pinhead can somehow move. Well, in the case of the monarch butterfly, can migrate all the way from southern Canada all the way to central Mexico. It's in total, I think, a 2,000-mile migration. And they do that, of course, to overwinter. So they move down to this specific reserve in Mexico to overwinter. And in that reserve, there's loads of pine forests, which create a kind of insulating microclimate, if you like, which protects the butterflies during the winter. And then when the end of the winter comes, they pack their bags and head up back north again, which is really, really cool. All through
I've seen images of monarch butterflies, as you describe, overwintering in Mexico, and when they do leave the trees, it's like this explosion of color, and you when you first see these trees, you don't really notice that there's anything on them, and when they finally come off, it's just it's just such a spectacle. I want to finish on their brains, but before we do that, we've got a couple of questions. So let's take a look. We've got some questions in from Janine and also from Mateo. We brought some white cabbage, some cabbage white caterpillars, and watched them turn into chrysalises.
Amazing.
It's been over a month now. No butterflies have emerged. What could have gone wrong?
Over a month now, did you say?
Over a month. They're in a glass tank with ventilation in the lid and natural light inside. Interesting.
Maybe it's something to do with the humidity. When you're keeping chrysalises, it's often important to spray them with a little bit of water, so they retain that moisture. Yeah, I mean, a lot of butterflies are just really, really fussy. They like optimal conditions, and a lot of them, even in the wild, don't survive to grow up to be butterflies. So you may have just been unlucky, but I'm not sure how long a cabbage white stays as a chrysalis. So you never know. Hold out hope. Don't give up just yet. You never know.
So if they're going to try again, try and keep the humidity.
Yeah, spray them with a bit of water or something like that.
Okay, sure. And then one more question, which is a good one. This is from Mateo, who's asking, can you tell us about the glasswing butterfly's wing? Because those wings are clear, which I've seen pictures of them. They are clear. So do they still have scales on them?
Yeah, they do. In fact, I know someone who's working on exactly that at the moment. How exactly the glasswing's wing is structured. And yeah, it does definitely seem to be incredibly intricate. But that is another incredible defense strategy in itself, of course. We were talking about mimicry and warning coloration earlier. These butterflies have actually evolved to be invisible, which is kind of the perfect defense against predators, which is really rare in terrestrial environments. If you look in a marine environment, you see some fish which have evolved some level of transparency, but in the terrestrial environment, it's really, really rare. So it's really cool that butterflies have done that. How they do it is still a topic of research.
Still a mystery.
Yeah.
Let's finish up, Mateo. Sorry, not Mateo. Mateo's watching. You're Benito. Yeah. Let's finish up on butterfly brains. Yes. I've called this butterfly brains, and we've hardly touched on them at all. So let's spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes on that, because it starts to get really technical. How do you scan a butterfly's brain? Do you have like a little miniature MRI scanner, and you put them in, and they go?
I wish I did, actually, Patrick, because it means I could do a lot more work from home if I did it that way. But no. So unfortunately, if you want to study something really small, you need a machine which is really big. Now, that's kind of how the thing goes. So essentially, the process of visualizing a butterfly's brain goes in 4 stages. So there's dissection. You've got to dissect the brain out. You've then got to stain it, scan it, and segment it. So stain basically means introducing a kind of fluorescent protein which binds to molecules in the brain. And that means when you shine a laser at it, it fluoresces. It means you can see it, right? So once you've done that, you can put the brain under a special microscope called a confocal microscope, which essentially takes images at different layers on the brain and creates something which we call an image stack. And if you combine all those images together, it's very much like how in the olden days people used to do cartoons, right? There's loads of pictures stacked on top of each other, and then you can go woo all the way through the brain from the top to the bottom. And then after that, you segment. And by that, basically, I mean colouring in, which is what I've been doing at the moment. So I'm going to try.
I like that.
I'm going to try and show you a photo. I don't know whether you'll be able to see this. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's have a little look.
This is my phone. So what you're seeing.
Oh yeah,
there,
if you hold it there, that's great. That's a great image there.
What you're seeing there are the raw butterfly brain scans, and then over here is what you see once you colour them in. So what I've done here is I've coloured in individual brain regions. So different parts of the brain do different things. So these big yellow structures process visual information. So they're connected to the eyes. You've got other structures which are connected to the antennae and so on.
That's great.
So by working out how big these structures are, we can get an idea of how useful they are to the butterfly, essentially.
And so tell us why. Well, I mean, that sounds really cool because you're using confocal microscopy, fluorescent stains, and lasers. To me, it sounds like you're at the world's best butterfly rave. Anything to do with lasers in science is it's not science unless it involves lasers.
Exactly.
Let's finish up on why you're studying the brain structure. What does that have to do with the way butterflies interact with their environment and how they survive in specific environments as well?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I'm studying this specific group of butterflies called the glasswing butterflies, which are a really, really diverse group of butterflies found in the Amazon. And what they do is that they mimic each other. So you have different species evolving the same colors and patterns to advertise the fact that they're toxic to predators. Okay, and what researchers found is that those mimics tend to live in the same places in the rainforest, the same microhabitats. So what I'm looking at is whether those different species which have evolved the same colors have also evolved the same sensory apparatus to cope with these different environments. And that's an idea which we call convergent evolution. So just like how birds and bats have both evolved wings, I'm testing whether these different groups of butterflies have convergently evolved the same sensory adaptations. And you can learn a lot by studying the brain, because ultimately the brain is what processes all that sensory information.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what do you think you're going to find out from that? How is that going to help our understanding of butterflies and insects in general?
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hoping to see is convergence, but the level of convergence may differ. So I'm not just looking at the brains, I'm looking at the eyes and the genes of these butterflies as well. So it's working out where precisely selection acts, and that will give us a good idea on how confined butterflies are to the environments in which they live, and how likely they are to be able to adapt when that environment changes. So this is all giving us a good idea on how ecosystems are organized, particularly in something like a tropical rainforest, which are, the most complex ecosystems on the planet. So it's about working out how they evolved and how kind of resistant they will be, if you like, to changes in that environment. If that makes sense.
Benito, that sounds really cool. I think I've come to the conclusion that your job is essentially one of the coolest on the planet. You run a butterfly rave house, and you spend your days colouring in for a living. I hope I've got that accurate.
Yeah, no, spot on.
I think we've come to the end of our time. We are I think we're at 30 minutes, just over 30 minutes. So I think we're going to call it a day there. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you, Benito. What's next for you?
Well, I'm just at the first year of my PhD at the moment, so I'm only just getting to grips with everything. So, the plan was to head off to Ecuador in September to do my field work. We'll see what Corona has to say about that.
Fingers crossed, exactly, I know. And if people want to see more of you, where can they do that?
Indeed. So I have a YouTube channel called Benito's Explanations. I'm also on Instagram at Benito Explains. So hopefully you'll have the link somewhere. So on there I post a selection of videos, not just about butterflies, you'll be pleased to hear, about all sorts of animals, and trying to link up what we see in nature with the science behind it, hopefully in an amusing way. So
I've seen a couple of the videos, and they are pretty funny, nice, fun, quirky, bags of character from yourself. So thank you for making those videos. There is a link in the description for anybody who wants to check out Benito's Explanations on YouTube and Benito Explains on Instagram and Twitter. Benito, we're going to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Patrick.
And good luck with the rest of the PhD. We'll definitely chat sometime soon.
Thank you.
Nice one. Take care.
See ya.
All right, bye. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Benito Wainwright. He's an evolutionary. Oh, can you see me? There we go. He's an evolutionary and sensory biologist. Definitely take a look at his page. Lots of fun, interactive videos to keep you entertained over this lockdown period. On Monday, we're back again with another episode. We're going to be joined by Julia Newth. She is a swan specialist. She's going to be telling us about her passion for swans and talking about Swan Champions, a group of people that are looking out in recent years. So she's going to be telling us all about her passion and how she and her team are working to protect these beautiful, wonderful species. Until then, please remember, if you are a new subscriber, hit that subscribe button and press the little bell button as well. That will give you a notification anytime a new video comes up. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.